The restaurant was loud, filled with the clinking of glasses and the expensive smell of roasted steak. It was my mother's 60th birthday, and the whole family was there. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in years. My 8-year-old son, Leo, sat next to me, carefully picking at his vegetables. He was wearing his favorite sweater, one he had picked out himself because it made him feel fancy. My mother, Evelyn, sat at the head of the table like a queen on a throne. Suddenly, the chatter stopped. She tapped her glass with a spoon, but she wasn't looking at the crowd. She was staring directly at Leo with a look of pure disgust. "Look at him," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a cold blade. "Look at that messy hair and that cheap, tacky sweater. He looks like a street urchin." The table went silent. Leo's fork hit his plate with a dull thud. My mother didn't stop there. She leaned forward, making sure every relative could hear her clearly. "I suppose we shouldn't expect much. He has that bad blood from his father's side. He's slow, isn't he? Just a dim-witted child who doesn't belong at a table like this." I felt my heart stop. I looked around, expecting someone to gasp or defend him. Instead, a few of my cousins actually chuckled. My brother smirked into his wine glass. They were all so used to her cruelty that they treated it like entertainment. Leo's face turned bright red, and his lip began to tremble. He looked down at his lap, trying to hide the tears that were starting to well up in his eyes. He looked so small in that big, fancy chair. "In fact," Evelyn continued, her eyes snapping to mine, "I'm tired of pretending. You and this pathetic excuse for a grandson are officially dead to me. Don't call me, don't come to my house, and don't expect a dime from the estate. You are both nothing but a stain on this family's reputation. Get out now." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every eye in the room was on me, waiting for me to scream, cry, or throw my drink. I didn't do any of those things. I felt an icy calm wash over me. I stood up slowly, and the entire room held its breath. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look at my mother at first. Instead, I reached down and took Leo's hand. His fingers were shaking, and he was staring at the floor, completely crushed. I leaned down and whispered into his ear, "You are the best thing in this world, Leo. None of this is true." I stood up straight and began gathering our coats. My mother watched me with a smug smirk on her face. She thought she had broken me. She thought her public execution of my dignity was the final blow in a war she had been winning for decades. The relatives were whispering now, their eyes darting between me and Evelyn. My husband, Marcus, stayed seated next to my brother. He didn't stand up. He didn't even look at me. He just stared at his plate, his jaw tight, but his hands stayed firmly on the table. He was a coward, just like the rest of them, terrified of losing his place in Evelyn's good graces. The smirk on my mother's face grew wider when she saw that even my own husband wouldn't defend us. She felt powerful. She felt untouchable. I slung my purse over my shoulder and looked my mother right in the eyes. I didn't look angry. I looked at her with pity that seemed to rattle her more than a scream would have. Her smirk flickered for a second. I didn't say a word to the rest of the family. I didn't explain myself or plead for them to understand how cruel this was. I simply turned and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking firmly on the marble floor. As we passed the host stand, I could still hear the low hum of judgment following us out the door. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the cool night air. Leo was crying quietly now, the tears finally spilling over. I walked him to the car, buckled him in, and kissed his forehead. "Wait here for just a second, baby," I said softly. I shut the door and stood in the shadows of the parking lot. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands weren't shaking at all. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the one person who could end Evelyn's reign of terror. The phone rang only twice before a deep, professional voice answered. "Hello," it said. It was Julian, a man who dealt in facts, figures, and the kind of power that didn't need to shout to be felt. He was someone my mother feared, though she would never admit it to anyone. I took a deep breath, my voice coming out steady and cold. "It's time, Julian," I said. "The grace period is over. I want everything executed exactly as we discussed. No delays, no second chances." There was a short pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the sound of papers shuffling. Julian didn't ask me if I was sure. He knew me well enough to know that if I was making this call, The bridge hadn't just been burned, it had been vaporized. I understand, Julian replied. I have the files ready. I'll start the process immediately. By tomorrow morning, the first notices will be delivered. I'll handle everything from here. I thanked him and ended the call. I stood there for a moment, looking at the glowing windows of the restaurant. Inside, my mother was probably still laughing, telling another story about how she had finally cleansed the family of our presence. She had no idea that her world was about to move beneath her feet. She thought she was the one holding the scissors, cutting us out of her life. She didn't realize I had already rewritten the entire script years ago. I got back into the car and started the engine. Leo looked at me, his eyes red and puffy. Are we going home, Mommy? He asked in a small, broken voice. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Yes, Leo. We're going home. And from now on, things are going to be very, very different. Nobody is ever going to talk to you like that again. I promise. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw the restaurant shrinking in the rearview mirror. The one call was made. The wheels were in motion. As I drove, my mind raced back through the years. This wasn't just about a birthday dinner. This was the boiling point of a long, miserable history. Evelyn had always been a master of this slow burn. Growing up, I wasn't a daughter. I was a project that never quite met her standards. She would make subtle comments about my weight, my grades, and my friends. She had a way of saying, I love you, that sounded like a threat. She preferred my brother, Simon, because he never questioned her. He was the perfect, obedient puppet. When I married Marcus, she tried to take over the wedding. When I got my first job, she told me I was overreaching. But the real shift happened when Leo was born. He was different, sensitive, creative, and slow to warm up to strangers. Evelyn hated that. She wanted a grandson she could parade around like a trophy. When Leo didn't fit her mold, she started the bad blood narrative. She told everyone he took after my husband's side of the family, which she considered beneath her. Financial manipulation was her favorite weapon. She held the family trust over everyone's head like a guillotine. My father had left a massive estate, but he had given Evelyn total control over the disbursements until her death or incapacity. She used that money to keep my brother and even my husband on a short leash. They didn't dare cross her because they wanted the lifestyle her money provided. I was the only one who had worked to build my own career, but even I had been trapped in her web for far too long. I realized tonight that the humiliation of Leo was her endgame. She wanted to see if I would sacrifice my son's spirit just to stay in her good graces. She thought she could insult a child and I would stay silent for the sake of the inheritance. She truly believed that everyone had a price. But she had forgotten one very important detail about the paperwork my father had signed before he passed away. A detail I had discovered 3 years ago and kept hidden for this exact moment. We pulled into our driveway, and before I could even turn off the car, another set of headlights swung in behind us. It was Marcus. I felt a surge of anger, but I pushed it down. I needed to stay calm. I helped Leo out of the car and walked him into the house. I told him to go upstairs and get into his pajamas, promising I'd be up to tuck him in soon. As soon as his bedroom door closed, I heard the front door slam. Marcus was standing in the hallway, looking exhausted and annoyed. What was that, Clara? He hissed, his voice low so Leo wouldn't hear. You just walked out. Do you have any idea how embarrassed I was? Your mother was in the middle of her speech. I stared at him, genuinely shocked. Embarrassed. I repeated. Your son was just told he was bad blood and dim-witted in front of 30 people. My mother told us we were dead. And you're worried about her speech. Marcus groaned and rubbed his face. You know how she is. She's old, she's dramatic. You should have just let it go and apologized later. Now she's going to cut us off completely. Do you realize what that means for our future? For Simon's kids? You've made a huge mess over a few mean words. His words landed harder than any insult Evelyn had ever thrown at me. He wasn't just a bystander. He was a collaborator. He was willing to let our son be bullied if it meant he got to keep his comfortable life. It's not just mean words, Marcus, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It's abuse. And it's over. I'm not letting it go. Marcus laughed, a bitter, stressed sound. And what are you going to do? You have nothing compared to her. You just threw away everything we were supposed to inherit. I looked at him and realized I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me. At that moment, I made an irreversible decision. I wasn't just leaving my mother's shadow. I was leaving this marriage, too. I went upstairs to Leo's room. He was tucked under his blankets, but he wasn't asleep. The room was dark, save for a small nightlight shaped like a star. I sat on the edge of his bed and ran my hand over his hair. He looked up at me, his eyes still shiny with unshed tears. "Mommy," he whispered. "Did I do something wrong at the dinner? Is that why Grandma was mad?" My heart broke into a million pieces. "No, Leo," I said firmly. "You did absolutely nothing wrong. Grandma is a very unhappy person, and she says things that aren't true because she doesn't know how to be kind. It has nothing to do with you. You are smart, you are handsome, and you are the best boy I know." He sniffled and pulled his blanket up to his chin. "She said I have bad blood. What does that mean?" I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to go back to that restaurant and tear it down brick by brick. "It means she's wrong," I told him. "It's just a silly thing people say when they want to be mean. You have the best blood. You have my blood, and your dad's blood, and you are perfect." He seemed to relax a little, but the damage was done. I knew this would be a memory that stuck with him forever. This was the emotional line in the sand. I couldn't just fix this with words. I had to show him that there were consequences for people who treated others like garbage, even if those people were family. As I walked out of his room and into the hallway, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from Julian. It was brief and professional. "The first injunction has been filed. The bank accounts associated with the family trust have been frozen for audit as of 5 minutes ago. She will find out when she tries to pay the dinner tab." I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. It was starting. The monster was about to find out she wasn't the one in charge. The next morning, the storm arrived. I was in the kitchen making Leo's breakfast when my phone started ringing off the hook. It was Evelyn. I declined the call. Then it was Simon. I declined that too. Finally, a text came through from my mother, written in all caps. "What have you done? The restaurant declined my card. My personal accounts are locked. Call me this instant or I will have the police at your door." I leaned back against the counter and took a sip of my coffee. I could only imagine the scene at the restaurant. Evelyn, the great matriarch, trying to pay for her lavish 60th birthday party only to have the waiter tell her the card was "refer to issuer." The embarrassment she tried to pile onto Leo had come back to her tenfold. She would have had to ask Simon to pay, or worse, one of the cousins she always looked down on. For a woman who lived for status, that was a fate worse than death. She wasn't just losing her credit cards. The injunction Julian filed was based on a specific clause in my father's will regarding the immoral and ethical management of the trust funds. Because I had documented her using the funds to manipulate and emotionally abuse family members, and because I had proof of her financial negligence, the court had granted a temporary freeze. She woke up thinking she was a millionaire and found out she couldn't even buy a bagel. The threats kept coming. She called me a thief, a traitor, and a disgusting snake. She assumed I had hacked her or committed some kind of fraud. She couldn't wrap her head around the fact that I had used the law against her. She had spent her life thinking she was above the rules because she had the money. Now the money was gone, and the rules were all she had left. She was panicking, and when Evelyn panicked, she became dangerous. Marcus came into the kitchen, his face pale as he scrolled through his phone. "Clara, what is going on? My brother is freaking out. He says your mother's accounts are frozen. He says you did something." I didn't look up from the stove. "I didn't do anything, Marcus. I simply triggered a review of the trust that should have happened years ago. My father's will had very specific terms about how that money was to be used." Evelyn ignored them. "I didn't." Marcus stared at me like I was a stranger. "You had access to the trust documents? How?" Simon said only Evelyn and the lawyers had the keys to the vault. I finally looked at him and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. 3 years ago, when Evelyn asked me to help her organize her legacy files because she didn't trust Simon with the paperwork, I found the original, unedited will. The one she hid. I took photos of every single page. I also found the records of the money she's been skimming. The leverage I had wasn't just about her being mean at a dinner party. It was about the fact that she had been illegally diverting funds into her own private accounts for years, leaving the rest of the family with crumbs while she lived like royalty. I had quietly handed all of this to Julian, who was a specialist in estate fraud, months ago. We were just waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. The dinner was simply the signal. Marcus sat down at the table, his head in his hands. You've been planning this for years? While we were sleeping in the same bed, you were plotting to destroy her. I shook my head. I wasn't plotting to destroy her. I was plotting to protect us. But then I realized you didn't want protection. You wanted the crumbs. You chose her side a long time ago, Marcus. You just didn't realize that her side was a sinking ship. By noon, the family began to swarm. My phone was a constant vibration of guilt trips and demands. My Aunt Nora called, her voice high and frantic. Clara, dear, you have to fix this. Your mother is inconsolable. She's saying you've stolen her life's work. Surely we can talk about this like a family. Think of the scandal. I told Nora that the only scandal was how she sat there and laughed while her great-nephew was bullied. I hung up before she could respond. Evelyn was busy spinning a masterpiece of a victim narrative. She was telling everyone that I was mentally unstable, that I was bitter about my husband's career, and that I was trying to kidnap her fortune. She even called my old boss to warn him about my character. She was trying to burn my world down because I had dared to touch hers. It was classic Evelyn. If she couldn't control you, she would try to delete you. One of my younger cousins, Toby, sent me a message that changed everything. Unlike the others, Toby had always been a bit of an outcast. Clara, I'm at her house right now. Simon and Nora are here. They're talking about calling Child Protective Services on you. They're saying you're a danger to Leo. They're trying to build a case that you've had a breakdown. Be careful. My blood turned to ice. She wasn't just coming for my money or my reputation anymore. She was coming for my son. That was the slip I needed. They were so arrogant that they discussed their illegal schemes in front of people they assumed were loyal. Toby had recorded the conversation on his phone and sent it to me. It was a clear conspiracy to file a false report. I felt a surge of adrenaline. If she wanted to play dirty, I was ready. I had years of receipts, and she was just getting started. I didn't call the police, and I didn't call my mother. I called Julian again and forwarded him Toby's recording. Then, I sat down at my computer and opened a folder labeled Evidence. It was massive. It contained every nasty email she had sent, every recording of her belittling Leo, and every financial discrepancy I had found. I had spreadsheets showing exactly how much she had stolen from the trust. Over $4 million over the last decade. I also had a very special recording from 2 years ago. It was a video of Evelyn bragging about how she had tricked my father into changing his will on his deathbed while he was heavily medicated. She had been drinking wine and thought it was a funny story to tell at a private dinner. I had been filming Leo playing in the background, but the camera caught every word she said. It was the ultimate receipt. I spent the afternoon organizing a formal response package. I wasn't going to leak this to the press or post it on social media. Not yet. I was going to send it to the people who actually mattered. The board of the charity she chaired, the trustees of the estate, and the judge who had signed the injunction. I wanted her to see the walls closing in, brick by brick. I wanted her to realize that silence doesn't mean weakness. As I was finishing, a heavy knock came at the door. I looked at the security camera and saw a man in a suit holding a manila envelope. I opened the door, and he handed it to me without a word. It was a formal notice from my mother's attorneys. She was suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress and defamation. I almost laughed. She was trying to sue me for things she had actually done to me. I took the papers and went back inside. The game was truly on. 2 days later, there was a local charity gala. It was the biggest social event of the year, and Evelyn was the guest of honor. She had spent months preparing for this, and she wasn't about to let a minor financial hiccup stop her. She managed to borrow money from Simon to buy a new dress and pay for a car service. She wanted to show the world she was still in control. She wanted to show me that I hadn't moved the needle. I didn't attend, but Toby kept me updated. He said she was walking around with her chin held high, wearing her pearls and a fake smile. But there was a crack in the mask. People were starting to whisper. Julian had made sure that the audit of the charity's books, which she oversaw, was public knowledge. The influential donors were looking at her differently. They weren't bowing like they used to. They were asking questions she couldn't answer. One woman, a very powerful local judge named Mrs. Gable, apparently asked Evelyn directly about the legal disputes involving her family trust. Toby said my mother's hands shook so hard she almost dropped her champagne flute. She tried to laugh it off, saying it was just a misunderstanding with a troubled daughter, but Mrs. Gable didn't buy it. She just gave Evelyn a long, cold look and walked away. The prestige Evelyn had spent 40 years building was evaporating in a single evening. Without the absolute power of her checkbook, she was just an old woman with a mean streak. People who had tolerated her for years out of fear or greed were suddenly finding their spines. The execution she had planned for me at the restaurant was now happening to her, but in slow motion, under the glitter of a ballroom chandelier. Late that night, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew the voice instantly. It was my mother. She wasn't screaming this time. Her voice was low and hissed. "You think you're so smart, Clara. You think you can use your father's ghost to haunt me. But do you know why I did it? Why did I say those things to that boy at the table?" I stayed silent, letting her talk. I knew she was recording, and I was too. "I did it to show you that you are nothing without me," she said. "I wanted to break you. I wanted to see you crawl back and beg for your inheritance. I wanted you to know that I own your future and your son's future. You were getting too independent, too sure of yourself. I had to remind you of your place." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. The humiliation of Leo wasn't an outburst. It was a strategy. It was a test of my submission. She thought that by hurting the thing I loved most, she could force me back into her shadow. She thought fear was stronger than a mother's love. She was wrong. My plan didn't backfire, she claimed, though her voice sounded desperate. "This is just a temporary setback. I will have you in court for the next 10 years. I will spend every cent I have left to make sure you end up with nothing. I'll take that house. I'll take everything. You don't have any sense left, Evelyn," I said calmly. "And the court isn't going to take 10 years. They've already seen the deathbed video." There was a long, dead silence on the line. I could hear her breathing, heavy and ragged. She had forgotten about that night. She had forgotten she had confessed to the one thing that would strip her of every legal protection she had. "What video?" she whispered. I hung up. The one call I made that night in the parking lot wasn't just to a lawyer. Julian was a lawyer, yes, but he was also the primary executor of my father's shadow trust. My father hadn't been as oblivious as Evelyn thought. In the final months of his life, he had suspected she was manipulating his accounts. He had set up a secondary hidden layer of protection that only Julian and I could access, if certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was documented proof of familial abuse or financial malfeasance. The call I made was the final key to unlocking that shadow trust. It essentially stripped Evelyn of her power of appointment. It meant she was no longer the one who decided who got the money. The authority had legally shifted to me the moment Julian verified the evidence of her behavior at the restaurant and her attempts to file false CPS reports. This was why the consequences were going official. It wasn't a family fight anymore. It was a legal takeover. The board of directors for the family business received a formal notice that Evelyn was being removed from her position due to a breach of fiduciary duty. Her reputation as a business leader was finished. She was being replaced by a professional management firm I had selected months ago. She had spent her life using people as pawns. Now, she was the only piece left on the board, and she was surrounded. The people she thought were her friends were already calling Julian to see how they could distance themselves from her. She was toxic, and in the world of high finance and social circles, toxicity is a death sentence. The grandmother who died to us was now finding out what it felt like to be dead to the world. The house felt like a war zone, even though it was quiet. Marcus was a nervous wreck. He hadn't spoken to me in 24 hours, but he was constantly on his phone, likely talking to Simon. Finally, he cornered me in the laundry room. "Clara, stop this. Please. Just tell Julian to drop the audit. Tell the board it was a mistake. Evelyn is losing everything. Simon says she's barely eating. You have to make it stop." I looked at him, amazed at his audacity. Why would I stop it? She tried to have our son taken away by CPS, Marcus. Did you forget that part? Or does the money matter more than Leo? Marcus flinched. She was just angry. She wouldn't have actually gone through with it. It's just how she talks. But this, what you're doing is permanent. You're ruining her life. You're ruining Simon's life. I'm not ruining anything, I said, folding a towel with precise movements. I'm just allowing the consequences of her own actions to reach her. She stole money. She abused her family. She lied to the courts. If that ruins her life, then her life was built on a lie to begin with. I looked him in the eye. And if you want it to stop so badly, you're welcome to go live with her. But you won't, because she can't pay for your car anymore, can she? He realized then that I wasn't the same woman he had married. I wasn't the quiet one, who stayed in the background. I was the person who held his future in my hands, and I didn't care about his comfort anymore. He saw the coldness in my eyes and finally, for the first time, he looked truly afraid. He walked out of the room without another word. He knew he was on the wrong side of history, and there was no way back. The collapse of Evelyn's social standing happened faster than anyone expected. It wasn't through messy Facebook posts or public shouting matches. It was through the quiet exit. One by one, the committee she served on sent her polite emails, accepting her resignation, even though she hadn't resigned. The country club suspended her membership pending the outcome of the legal audit. The invitations to dinners and galas simply stopped coming. People who used to kiss her ring were now unavailable when she called. She was a social leper. The facts were surfacing in all the right places. The bank, the courts, and the inner circles of the city's elite. Everyone knew about the frozen accounts and the deathbed video. In a town where image is everything, Evelyn had become the ultimate cautionary tale. She was no longer a matriarch. She was a liability. Then came the first direct reach out. I was sitting on my porch with a book when a car pulled up. It wasn't my mother, but her personal assistant, a young woman named Sarah who had looked terrified for years. She handed me a handwritten note. It was from Evelyn. No threats, no all-caps screaming. Just 3 sentences. I want to see my grandson. I am willing to discuss a settlement. Come to the house tomorrow at 4 p.m. I looked at the note and felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, just a deep sense of boredom. She was still trying to set the terms. She was still trying to summon me to her house. She thought she could still bargain using Leo as a chip. I looked at Sarah and said, tell her if she wants to talk, she can call my lawyer. And tell her she is never, ever seeing Leo again. I watched the car drive away, knowing that for Evelyn, that was the ultimate defeat. The next day, she actually called. Not to scream, but to offer what she called an olive branch. I took the call on speakerphone while I was in my office. Clara, she said, her voice sounding thin and old. I'm sorry about what happened at the restaurant. I was stressed. My birthday always makes me emotional. I shouldn't have said those things about the boy. It was uncharacteristic of me. I almost laughed. Uncharacteristic. Evelyn, you've been saying things like that for 30 years. And you didn't just say things. You tried to destroy us. You tried to frame me for child abuse. There was a pause. I didn't mean it. It was just a tactic. Let's be reasonable. I'll sign over the small lake house to you, and I'll give you a seat on the foundation board. In exchange, you tell Julian to withdraw the fraud charges. We can be a family again. It was a hollow apology with strings attached. She was trying to buy her way out of a prison sentence. She still didn't get it. She thought I was haggling for a better deal. I don't want the lake house, Evelyn, I said. And I don't want to be a family with you. You said we were dead to you. I'm just making sure we stay that way. Her voice sharpened. Don't be a fool. You're throwing away millions. For what? A little pride. For my son's peace, I replied. You humiliated him for sport. You will never have the chance to do it again. The fraud charges aren't mine to withdraw. They belong to the state now. You stole from a regulated trust. This is out of my hands. The silence on the other end was long and heavy. For the first time, the reality of her situation seemed to sink in. She wasn't just losing her daughter. She was losing her freedom. A week later, I requested a formal meeting at Julian's office. My mother arrived with Simon, who looked like he hadn't slept in a month. Evelyn was wearing a black suit, looking every bit the grieving widow she had played for years. She sat across from me, her eyes cold but her hands steady. She thought this was a negotiation. I was there to draw a line in stone. Here are the new rules, I said, pushing a document across the table. You will have zero contact with Leo. You will not send gifts, you will not call, and you will not show up at his school. If you do, the restraining order we've already drafted will be served immediately. You will also sign this confession regarding the diversion of trust funds. In return, I will recommend that the trust doesn't pursue the full $4 million in civil court, only the amount you currently have left in your personal accounts. Evelyn laughed, a short, dry sound. You think you can dictate terms to me? I'm your mother. I built this legacy. I didn't blink. You're a woman who stole from her own children and bullied a 9-year-old. Your legacy is a folder of evidence in Julian's safe. You have no leverage. If you don't sign this today, we will go to trial. And you know exactly what that deathbed video will do to you in front of a jury. Simon looked at his mother, begging her with his eyes to just sign. He knew it was over. He wanted to save whatever was left of his own reputation. But Evelyn was a narcissist to the core. She couldn't admit she had lost. She looked at the paper, then at me, and her lip curled. You're just like me, Clara. You're cold and calculating. You'll end up just like me, alone. She thought that was a threat. To me, it sounded like she was admitting she had already lost. The laugh died when Julian stepped into the room with a second folder. Actually, Evelyn, he said, there's one more thing. The audit found that you also forged your husband's signature on several life insurance policies 6 months before he passed. That's a felony. The insurance company has been notified. They aren't as forgiving as family. The color drained from her face. She looked at Simon, but he looked away. That was the final confirmation. The laugh was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, naked terror. She realized then that I hadn't just been defending myself. I had been thorough. I had looked under every rock, and everything I found was a weapon. Her power was officially, legally, and socially gone. She wasn't a matriarch anymore. She was a suspect. She picked up the pen with a shaking hand and signed the documents. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so deep it was almost impressive. I hope you're happy, she whispered. You've destroyed your family. I stood up and straightened my jacket. No, Evelyn. I saved my son. The family was already destroyed. I just finally cleared away the rubble. I walked out of the room, leaving her there with the lawyers and the ghost of the life she had ruined. Outside, the sun was shining. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of her expectations, her insults, and her control was gone. I felt light. Marcus was waiting in the hallway, looking lost. He tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. The choice he had to make was coming, and he already knew what it was. The complicit were about to face their own day of reckoning. Over the next month, the complicit began to crumble. Marcus tried to play the role of the supportive husband, but the trust was gone. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man who stayed seated while our son was being torn down. I told him I wanted a divorce. He begged, he cried, he promised to change. But I knew that you can't build a house on a foundation of cowardice. He moved out 2 weeks later. Simon's life also changed. Without Evelyn's extra disbursements from the trust, he couldn't afford his lifestyle. He had to sell his expensive cars and move his kids to a public school. He blamed me, of course. He sent me long, rambling emails about how I had robbed his children. I didn't respond. He had been a grown man living off a thief's spoils. It was time for him to learn what a real job felt like. The rest of the relatives went silent. The aunts and uncles who had laughed at the dinner table were suddenly very quiet. They were afraid that if they spoke up, I would turn my audit eyes toward them. They were right to be afraid. I wasn't looking for revenge against them, but I wasn't going to be their ATM either. The family tree was being pruned, and only the healthy branches were going to stay. Evelyn moved into a small apartment, the only thing she could afford after the trust was settled and the insurance company took their share. She tried to tell people she was downsizing for a simpler life, but everyone knew the truth. She was a woman in exile. She was alone, just as she had predicted for me. But unlike her, I wasn't alone because I was cruel. She was alone because she had finally run out of people to hurt. A few months later, I was watching Leo play in a local soccer match. He was running across the grass, laughing with his teammates, his hair messy and his jersey dirty. He looked happy. He looked free. There was no one on the sidelines criticizing his bad blood or mocking his intelligence. He was just a boy, and he was loved. That was the only victory that mattered to me. I realized then that real strength isn't about screaming or throwing food. It's about the quiet walk away. It's about having the courage to say, "This is not okay," and then making sure it never happens again. I hadn't raised my voice once during the entire process. I didn't need to. The truth is louder than any scream, and the law is stronger than any bully's threats. I didn't look back at the life I had left. I didn't miss the fancy dinners or the fake family unity that was built on a lie. My new life was smaller, but it was peaceful. My house was a sanctuary, not a cage. I had my son, I had my career, and I had my dignity. For the first time, I wasn't the shadow in the family. I was the one standing in the sun. Evelyn tried one last move. She sent a letter to the local newspaper, a letter to the editor, about the tragedy of elder abuse and the betrayal of children. She didn't name names, but it was obvious who she was talking about. She wanted one last public performance of her victimhood. She thought she could still sway the public narrative. She thought people still cared about her story. The letter backfired spectacularly. Instead of people feeling sorry for her, several former employees and even a few of the friends she had burned stepped forward in the comment section and on social media. They shared their own stories of her cruelty. One former maid talked about how Evelyn had fired her for looking at her wrong. A former business partner detailed how she had tried to cheat him out of his shares. The truth was already out, and the public wasn't interested in her version anymore. The crowd had seen behind the curtain, and they didn't like what they saw. Her attempt to humiliate me again only served to cement her own reputation as a bitter, delusional woman. People weren't whispering about me anymore. They were laughing at her. The executioner had become the punchline. I didn't even have to respond. The community did it for me. It was a strange feeling, to be defended by people I barely knew. It made me realize how much silence there had been around my mother for years. Everyone knew she was a monster, but no one wanted to be the first to say it. Once I opened the door, everyone else walked through it. The narrative hadn't just flipped, it had been rewritten from the ground up. I saw her at a grocery store once during that time. She looked smaller, her skin sallow and her clothes a bit wrinkled. She saw me and opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't stop. I didn't even break my stride. I walked past her as if she were a ghost, which in a way, she was. She was a ghost of a past I had outgrown. I didn't hate her anymore. I just didn't care. Witnesses continued to step forward. People I hadn't spoken to in a decade called me to apologize for staying silent during those years. My Aunt Nora even came to my house, looking ashamed. "I'm sorry, Clara," she said, sitting on my sofa. We all knew Evelyn was out of control, but we were all so dependent on her. We were cowards. What she said to Leo, it was the last straw for me too. I just didn't have your strength. I appreciated the apology, but it didn't change things. I realized that loyalty bought with money isn't loyalty at all. It's just a long-term transaction. I wasn't interested in rebuilding a relationship with people who only found their morals once the money ran out. I told Nora I forgave her, but that I wasn't looking for a family reunion. I was moving forward, not backward. The grandmother realized she was truly alone. Even Simon had stopped visiting her as often, as he was too busy trying to keep his own head above water. She had spent her life making sure everyone was beneath her, and now she was at the bottom of the hill with no one to pull her up. She had built a kingdom of fear, and once the fear was gone, the kingdom was just an empty, cold room. Leo's confidence grew every day. He started taking art classes and even joined a theater group. He wasn't the quiet, dim-witted boy Evelyn had described. He was vibrant, funny, and incredibly kind. He had a circle of friends who liked him for who he was, not because of his last name or his mother's bank account. Seeing him flourish was the greatest receipt of all. One afternoon, Leo came home with an award from his school. It was for kindness and leadership. He held it up, his face beaming with pride. "Look, Mommy. They said I'm a leader." I hugged him tight, feeling a lump in my throat. This was the boy she had tried to break. This was the bad blood she had mocked. He was more of a leader at 9 than she had ever been in 60 years. I reflected on what actually mattered. It wasn't the millions of dollars or the social status. It was this moment. It was the feeling of your child knowing they are safe and valued. It was the peace of a quiet home and a clear conscience. I had risked everything, my marriage, my financial security, my family ties, to protect this. And looking at Leo's smile, I knew I would do it 1,000 times over. The revenge wasn't about hurting Evelyn. It was about liberating Leo. It was about showing him that nobody, not even a grandmother, has the right to treat you with contempt. I had taught him the most important lesson of his life, that you don't have to stay at a table where love isn't being served. You can stand up, make one call, and walk out into a better world. The cycle of abuse in my family had ended with me. I was the circuit breaker. Leo would grow up knowing how to set boundaries, how to stand up for himself, and how to value people over property. He would never have to send money to someone who hated him, and he would never have to beg for a place at a table that didn't want him. He was free, and that was the absolute victory. Life finally stabilized. The legal battles ended, the trust was restructured, and the family drama faded into the background. I had moved us to a slightly smaller house in a better neighborhood, a place that was filled with light and laughter. Marcus and I finalized our divorce, and while it was sad, it was necessary. He was a part of the world I had to leave behind to save the one I had. Peace had replaced the constant, buzzing chaos of my mother's influence. I no longer woke up wondering what she would do or say next. I no longer felt the need to check in or manage her moods. I was the architect of my own life. I had my own business now, a small design firm that was doing well, and I didn't need a shadow trust to feel secure. I was secure because I was capable. One final message arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was an email from Evelyn's lawyer. She had been hospitalized after a minor stroke. The lawyer said she was asking for me. He said she wanted to make peace before it was too late. I sat at my desk and looked at the screen for a long time. 10 years ago, I would have dropped everything and run to her side. I would have felt guilty and responsible. But I didn't feel guilty. I felt nothing. I knew that making peace was just another tactic. She wanted an audience for her final performance. She wanted to hear me say I forgave her so she could feel like she had won in the end. But true peace doesn't require a witness. I had already made my peace months ago in a restaurant parking lot. I didn't need to hear anything else from her. I deleted the email without opening it. I didn't call the lawyer, and I didn't go to the hospital. I realized that being dead to someone like Evelyn wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. It was the freedom to live without her poison. I was dead to her old world, and in that death, I had found a much better life. I wasn't her daughter anymore. I was just a woman who had saved herself. I went into the living room where Leo was sitting on the floor, surrounded by his own Lego sets. He was building something massive, a castle with no walls, only bridges, as he called it. He looked up and saw me, and he gave me a huge, toothy grin. "Hey, Mommy. Want to help me build the tower?" I sat down on the floor next to him and started snapping pieces together. The sound of the bricks clicking together was rhythmic and soothing. We sat there for an hour, just building and talking about his day. There was no tension, no fear, no shadow hanging over us. We were just two people who loved each other, building something new. I looked at my son and saw the future, a future where he was confident, kind, and completely unashamed of who he was. Leo laughed at something I said, a clear, bright sound that filled the room. The cycle was over. The one call had changed everything, but it wasn't the call that mattered most. It was the silence that followed, the beautiful, peaceful silence of a life lived on our own terms. I was finally free, and as Leo's laughter echoed through the house, I knew that being dead to her meant I was finally, truly alive.